The partnership between internal communications and marketing can be a particularly powerful one in serving the company's objectives. One of the things I love to see happen is when marketers, whenever they're coming up with anything new, if they put on that internal hat as well, just always set aside some thinking for the internal audience. How are we going to engage people first? How can we leverage the power of 50 employees or 5,000 employees to get our product or service out there? Because guess what? Your internal stakeholders are the most credible spokespersons that you will have. So when we collaborate with internal communications, really focusing on the overarching narrative and that all of the elements, the communication elements of the campaign for an internal audience are there. When you marry that with marketing, listen, it's magic, absolute magic.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and you've just heard from my awesome guest, Arlene Amitirigala. Now, Arlene is a global communications leader who has worked in both marketing and internal communications. And in this episode, we'll be exploring how the marketing and internal comms functions can best work together to both engage and empower employees to become advocates of the company brand in a way that will better build the brand and drive growth. Now, before we get started, remember an audit is the very first step of any great internal communication strategy. Even if your team hasn't formally put together a plan in the past, your organization has developed channels, patterns, and processes organically, and it's crucial to understand how information is flowing. Starting an audit can tell you where you might be missing the mark with current communications, including gaps in information, misunderstandings, overlooked teams, and ignored channels. Head on over to useworkshop.com/marketing to learn more and to download Workshop's complete 7-step guide to running an impressive internal communications audit. And as always, I'd like to give a special thanks to Workshop, who is my Season 2 sponsor. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation. Arlene, welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Kerry-Ann. And what a warm and wonderful welcome. Loving your podcast, and I'm honored to be a guest.
Thank you, and I'm honored to have you. I wanted to start off too with a level setting kind of question then, Arlene, as we start talking about internal communications. You being someone who is both, right, and has done both and has expertise in both. Could you start out by sharing with us what, in your view, is the difference between internal communications and marketing? As obvious as it probably would be to some people, I think that's a great place to level set and start.
So when I think about the difference, I consider marketing to be primarily an external facing role, because at its core, marketing is everything you do to create and deliver value to customers and clients. And you're delivering value, whether it be intangible or tangible products. It could be services. But the interesting aspect is that communication is an essential element in marketing, right? That's why you talk about marketing communications, because you have to communicate with your audience to sell that product or service. And then internal communications, as we just mentioned, is an internal facing role, an internal facing role where your activities and your messages are directed towards the people within your company. And of course, the expectation is that they'll be amplified externally. And previously, it might not necessarily have been an expectation, but we all know that just about everything that happens within your company is basically in the public domain. You know, whether your company has 20 people, 200, 20,000 or 200,000, they have families, they have friends, they're on social media. So nothing is going to be a secret in terms of your culture, your purpose, your values. And if you are elevating these to the right level, you absolutely want it to be on the outside. And that's where internal communications becomes essential.
I love that working perspective because, as you rightly said, the obvious difference between the two is that marketing certainly more externally focused, a key strategic business partner in driving sales, driving growth, driving brand externally. And then you have internal comms, certainly more internal facing. That's really who the audience is. It's an internal audience. But as you rightly pointed out, and just to build on that point, that ultimately, if we feel that we're in this nice protected bubble, just talking to our employees and everything, it just stops right in here and it doesn't have to go outside, or it doesn't have to impact outside. That's really not the case. There's so much that you can do internally that can get outside, that will impact outside, that will impact how we're perceived even by an external audience. So a very key strategic role. And certainly two roles that should be working in partnership. Do you have a view of how it should work either way, or certainly based on your experience? I know even not only working in companies, but as a consultant and someone who freelances, do you see a best positioning for the two roles and where they should sit in an organization, particularly where internal comms is concerned?
So that's an interesting question to consider. And I think it depends what works best for the organization. I don't think one is a sub-function of the other. Internal communications will always have an extremely close working relationship with HR, and necessarily so. My experience, my preference is for internal communications to reside within the communications team. And organizations structure themselves differently. Sometimes your communications team reports up into HR, or your communications team is grouped with marketing, or communications is a separate function. I don't know. I think that it's less important where internal communication sits, but ultimately what truly matters for this function to have impact is for your internal communications team to have a seat at the table and to be able to influence leadership effectively. Because it's not just about communicating and disseminating news and information that we believe employees need to know. It's not purely transactional. It's not just executional. It's a strategic role. And I think reframing how we look at internal communications is important. It has the same purpose and objective that you'd be going after in your external communications and relations. I mean, you're talking about the reputation management of the company. You're talking about driving business growth. You're talking about driving increased employee engagement. And these are factors that can absolutely determine the success and longevity of a company and how it operates sustainably. So internal comms, it's a strategic role with a seat at the table. You can have it sit wherever you'd like. I believe it's best served being with the communications team, because increasingly, Kerry-Ann, what you find is that your internal and external communications have to mirror each other. You have to be saying the same things internally that you're saying externally. Your employees can smell the inauthenticity.
Yes.
In a flash.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to reinforce, it's a strategic role.
I love that. It's a strategic role and it needs to have a seat at the table because of the power and the influence that it can create. It leads into the next question I had, because at the heart of what internal marketing is trying to achieve is to support a reality of strong employee engagement, right? And to go back to some of the comments that have been made in prior episodes from prior guests, when you talk about employee engagement, you're not just talking about a head knowledge. Okay, we can recite the mission statement. We know the customer, we know the brand values like the back of our hand. It's really not about that. It's about a deep level of engagement that almost sees the existence of an emotional connection. And we talk about great brands that have really been very good at engaging their employees in the common mission, vision, and purpose of the company. Could you share with us, again, from your experience, Arlene, what is the role that internal communications plays in driving strong employee engagement?
I think internal communications is about fostering employee engagement. The aim is to help deliver business results by enabling your employees to turn strategy into action. So it sits at the heart of the business. It's translating purpose, vision, and values for your people, because everything starts with them. And that's one of the things I love about the conversations that you lead in this podcast, Kerry-Ann, and even the posts that you make on LinkedIn. I would have to say it's unusual for a CMO to embrace such passion. Honestly, I find it unusual for a CMO to publicly embrace such passion for employee engagement. And I think it's noteworthy, and it's something that we would love for many leaders to emulate, because ultimately they all own employee engagement. It's not just for one function. It's not just for HR. It's not for your internal comms team. And so in internal comms, though, because we focus on it, we come in with that analytical view, because that's where you start. So just like in marketing, you're going to gather your data, you're going to gather your insights. You want to understand what's really going on with your people, what matters to them. Find out what do they need to know and how can you reach them best? Because you must understand your audience and speak to them in their voice, telling the stories that move them. And you talked about an emotional connection, and that's what you need to drive, because in internal communications, we talk about the think, feel, do model, or sometimes we say think, feel, act. And to get people to feel, you have to spark that emotional connection. You have to find the stories. You have to find out what matters to them. And they have to feel listened to. Some of what you consider in internal communications these are the same things that you consider in building great relationships. And I always like to quote Maya Angelou, where she says, I may forget what you said, I may forget what you did, but I'll never forget how you made me feel.
Yes.
And so that's at the heart or that's a huge guiding principle, especially when you sit down with leadership. And in internal communications, we coach leaders a lot around their communication, around their messaging, around how they're engaging their teams. And it goes beyond just telling employees, this is our business strategy. You have to help them understand, well, what's in it for me? And ultimately, does what I do matter? Every employee wants to know that what they do matters and that their opinions matter. And if you can do those things consistently through your communication, goodness, I think you're well on the route of building engaged people.
Absolutely. I'm glad you made the point that at the end of the day, it's everybody's job to be driving and being a part of the broader effort of driving employee engagement. To transition then from engagement into advocacy. And again, that's at the heart of internal marketing. It's how are we not only engaging employees, but how are we empowering them to become advocates of the brand? Do you see a role that internal comms can or has played in helping to empower employees to be advocates of the brand externally, in your experience?
Yes, I would say absolutely. The thing with internal communications is that every initiative, every campaign, every activity, the goal is to gain active support. And that active support, particularly if your business is selling products, well, or even services, that active support is in the external realm. And of course, at the high level, you want that employee advocacy for your organization in general. You want them to talk about why they love working at your company. But when I talk about employee advocacy and I talk about active support, let me break that down a little bit to make it more granular. Say you're launching a new product, right? Or new service. Obviously, you want your employees, who are your primary stakeholders, to be your advocates. Come on, if you're launching a beverage, you want to know that the people within your company
Yes.
can vouch for it as a quality beverage.
Absolutely.
So there's a ladder. So there's the passive support, right? So that's if they see some digital screens, or there's a flyer that you drop on the desks, or they attend an internal launch event. They say, okay, there's something new around, but that's it. But then up the ladder, you get to supportive behavior, where they go a step further. They say, oh, that's interesting. And they want to know more. So they ask questions. They download the information that you have on the company intranet, or they take up the desk drop. They carry home the sample. And then when you get to the active support level, they talk to their family and friends about it. They post about it on social media. They share coupons with their community, or they send them a link to make a purchase. I remember when I was working in beverage alcohol, and we had a line of wines that we were promoting at the time in the US. I got a case of wines. I had friends come over. We did an informal tasting at home, and then I gifted them bottles. So that's what I mean when you want that level of advocacy where it's not just a passive support. It's not just a supportive behavior, but you get them to active support. And very often that's a collaboration between several different departments. You got to collaborate with your supply team because your supply team is going to say, okay, we'll allocate a certain batch for employees. You got to work with your marketing team because, and again, that's what I love about this program. You talk about the active ways in which marketing can get involved in growing the business using the primary stakeholders. And then you get your internal communications team involved because in crafting the overall narrative and the messaging, you have to ensure it ties in with your purpose, your vision, your values, that it has that consistency.
I'm really aligned with what you're saying. And you know what? I'm just seeing the nomenclatures lining up because you talk about passive and then there's active support, which is when the team members are actually out there, as you say, they're posting, they're telling their network, their family, their friends, which is really what we would call employee advocacy. It's going out there and deliberately choosing to advocate on behalf of the brand. And that's interesting because it's a choice. It's not being browbeaten over the head and, okay, you need to post this or here's a flyer that you need to put up on your page. It's about people being so engaged and so enrolled in what's happening and they believe in the product that they're choosing to be advocates and they choose to support the initiative by advocating for it externally to their own personal network. And you started to mention now about marketing. At what point in your experience does internal comms, and I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, but at what point does internal comms cross over into the marketing realm in your view? I hope I'm being clear.
If I'm responding to that question correctly, what excited me most about working in internal communications is that essentially it was marketing communications that was carried out within a business. And so I actually stumbled into internal comms because I was coming from a marketing, a corporate comms, a marketing communications background. And every single one of the techniques that I had employed working in marketing communications with external audiences, I was able to use internally with internal comms.
Same techniques, same strategies, essentially.
Same principles. Think of it like moving people from consideration to conversion, which are the terms that we use in marketing. But one thing I discovered, and I don't know how many internal communicators are listening to this podcast right now and would agree with me, but internally, it's an even more demanding and discerning audience where authenticity is key. You can't hide from your own colleagues.
Oh,
they're going to see you walking down the corridor. So yeah. I think that's one of the big differences I would point out.
Yes. And I love the point that you've made about the fact that it's a tough audience, right? So you can't just post something on social media as a company brand can probably do. And then the external audience is out there, the customers, they can't look you in the face and say, oh, come on.
I know when you think about posting something on Instagram externally, and then you start measuring the number of engagements or impressions, etc., that's one thing. But when you post something on your company intranet, and you're getting the reactions live and direct.
Oh, yes. They come to your desk.
Indeed.
Exactly. I'm curious to know then. So I think we've really come to a place, Arlene, so far in the context of this discussion that obviously we're talking about two very similar roles. And I think we can agree that where internal marketing is concerned, for both employee engagement and advocacy, we need to be at the table together as part of this one conversation. That being said then, Arlene, what do you believe this partnership between these two functional areas should look like in your view? Or if you've been a part of teams like that already, I'd love to hear practically what does that partnership typically look like for those of us who probably wouldn't have had the benefit of seeing it play out in real life.
Yeah, great question, Kerry-Ann, because the partnership between internal communications and marketing can be a particularly powerful one in serving the company's objectives, specifically with marketing, and especially where you have new product launches or you're launching new services. That partnership can create very successful internal campaigns. One of the things I love to see happen is when marketers, whenever they're coming up with anything new, if they put on that internal hat as well, just always set aside some thinking for the internal audience. How are we going to engage people first? What's that launch event going to look like internally? What's the messaging going to be? How can we leverage the power of 50 employees or 5,000 employees to get our product or service out there, to highlight the benefits of it, to highlight the quality of it, and to encourage people? Because guess what? Your internal stakeholders are the most credible spokespersons that you will have in good times and in bad times, because they're typically going to tell the truth out there. And look, the other thing I want to say is usually the marketing departments, yes, they have the creative flair. They're always working with the external agencies, but they have bigger budgets. Yes, Kerry-Ann, you guys have the bucks, the big bucks.
Yes, I know the bigger, with not enough bucks, but I will agree that we have bigger bucks than internal comms. Yes, I will agree with that.
Exactly. So when we collaborate with that partnership with internal communications, really focusing on the overarching narrative and making sure that this fits with everything that's being said about the strategic objectives of the business, that it lines up with the purpose, and that all of the elements, the communication elements of the campaign for an internal audience are there. When you marry that with marketing, creating all of the collateral around the product, around the service, and then being part of the launch, listen, it's magic. Absolute magic.
Absolutely. I'm there with that. And if I could share a couple of quick testimonials in my own experience, in recent times, whenever we have a major campaign coming up, there's always that component that one of my team members get to execute the internal launch. And I love that you talk about that internal launch and you carve out a portion of that budget to launch activity that's solely focused on engaging employees into what's going to be going out to the external public where before it actually hits the airwaves. And I've seen it being so powerful. And I'm talking, this was when we could have big, nice in-person events.
Man. I miss those.
Oh man, I tell you, who knows when again. A few years ago, we were launching a major ad campaign, brand campaign for the first in a very long time. And we took over the parking lot, pitched a big tent, massive LED screens around where we could have projected all of the advertisements that we're going to be running. But we had a DJ with music and a bar with named branded beverages to kind of correlate and coincide with what was going to be coming out as part of the overall campaign message. We had red carpets, we had photo booths, so team members could come in and be a part of what is really like a movie premiere kind of a vibe. And they loved it. First of all, I think the fact that they were just so happy to be thought of was the first thing. Because too many times, employees will get a call about the new campaign from the customer who is seeing it before even the employees get to hear about it. You know what I mean? Or at best, they probably get an email with a link to the intranet with the ads. So here are the ads. We're launching it tomorrow. Go take a look. And I'll admit that not enough of us as marketers spend the time to really invest. And so they felt valued. They felt heard, they felt considered, they felt prioritized, because at the end of the day, if they're not engaged, then how can they engage customers? And then once they got to experience that and perhaps even give their feedback or share in the excitement, once it rolled out to the external public, then they too felt enrolled and part of that external message. So when their clients started to call, yes, I see a new campaign, it's so awesome. They're so vested in it that they feel like they own it too. And they'll want to talk about it as well. And so I really encourage it. It's so powerful when you can engage in that internal launch activity and enroll your team first. before you start to really talk about it and put it out there externally. It's powerful. I love that word that you used. Powerful, indeed it is. I wanted to know if you could share with us any examples, either from your own personal experience or with companies you would have had the benefit of partnering with, or reading about maybe some case stories of practically how you've seen the partnerships or between marketing and internal comms really coming together to create magic, as you say.
I'm very fortunate in that I have experienced it.
Wonderful.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And for example, when we were trying to increase sales of particular brand and a beverage brand, we collaborated together to come up with a concept that would engage employees around the brand, around the properties of the brand, and excite them in terms of they could taste test it, they could find out ways to mix it and use it. And when I worked with a marketing team and the kind of budget that they had to engage an agency, and we laid out a whole sensory experience with different stations. What the agency brought into the office location was just simply outstanding. And then we had a whole tasting journey set up in another location. And then we sponsored a competition where employees could, after they had participated, so they had a little map. So they went on this sensory journey. They had to tick off all of the experiences they had enjoyed. And then they had the opportunity to answer a couple questions and enter the competition. Now, what I found with that is all of us, so from the internal comm side and from the marketing side, we were able to contribute thinking that made this into a success. Because very often marketing might be thinking of it purely as how they would execute it in the external.
Right, correct.
And then for internal, I was able to say, okay, but let's add this, or maybe that won't be so suitable or engaging for our people within the office. So it turned out to be visually stunning, extremely engaging. We had high participation and it was impactful. That was a wonderful experience. But I contrast that with one of the previous projects that internal comms and marketing partnered on. And I have to say that what makes it work is having trust, inclusion, and open communication and clarity around who does what, who is responsible for what, who's accountable for what, who is supporting what area. It's a partnership. You're working together seamlessly. If one ball is falling, just catch it. It doesn't matter if internal comms doesn't work in marketing, catch the ball. It doesn't matter if the marketing team doesn't work in the internal comms team, catch the ball. You're partnering for success.
Love that. What you said trust.
Inclusion, yes.
And
open communication, yes.
Love that. Because sometimes I've found in my experience that there is sometimes, whether it's intentional or not, there can be almost a bit of an adversarial relationship between marketing and internal comms, in the sense that, well, that's your job and it's not, and you need to take up your end of the plate or your baton, and I'm taking up mine, and I'm not going to be doing somebody else's job. And perhaps if we took the time to really recognize the need for such a powerful and magical partnership, that at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same objective. There should be and such an anxious desire to want to, an urgent desire rather, to want to really go in 100% on every side to deliver on what the ultimate outcome is, which is to engage our employees in a way that will want them to become advocates of the brand. I think it's such a great opportunity. Wow. Awesome. Arlene, again, drawing on your wealth of experience, are you aware of any pitfalls? I'm sure you would have seen a few that you think internal comms and the marketing function should seek to avoid as they execute on this internal marketing partnership.
In addition to what I just mentioned in terms of having a particular attitude.
Yes.
I think both parties have to come into it with a very deep understanding of what they're trying to accomplish. And of course, sharing the data, sharing the analysis, sharing the research is critical. If both parties aren't starting from that place and being very clear on the outcomes that they're seeking, then it's going to be very difficult. So I would say clarity upfront on the outcome that you're seeking, the results that you want. And then for the separate functions, what kind of impact do you want to have on the business? And how will partnering enable that impact? I would say have that clear upfront.
Absolutely. Just having that upfront alignment of objectives is really very powerful, because ultimately, if you can't agree on where it is you want to go, you're probably not going to end up reaching there, certainly not together. And so I totally appreciate that.
And one of the things that I've found in my experience, Kerry-Ann, is that it really is that top-to-top relationship that kicks it off. So when you have your director of communications who's fully aligned with your director of marketing, and they start the communications and the alignment there, and then their respective teams see how aligned they are working in lockstep, then that relationship is able to cascade and both teams will work together more effectively.
It has to start there. I think that's a great pitfall to make sure that we avoid. And ultimately, to go back to your point, that we have to agree that we're going to the same place, and we have to see ourselves as true partners in getting there, irrespective of what you believe is functionally your role and functionally someone else's. If we've identified and aligned on the goal, if we're committed to getting there, and if we recognize that together we can get there and achieve the same outcome, then that's really a great partnership. Arlene, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so very much. Of course, I always love to kind of wrap first and foremost by asking, with everything that we would have discussed today, and we've really gotten some great nuggets from you, again, given your wealth of experience and knowledge in both the areas of marketing and internal comms. Could you give us, what do you believe is the key takeaway, the biggest nugget that you'd want our listeners to come away with having listened to today's conversation?
I would say break down silos when you're driving employee engagement. It's not about the function or the department that you belong to. You're all on the same side. So focus on breaking down silos if you're driving employee engagement. And within your role, whatever your role might be, focus on creating messages that help employees to think, feel, and act. Use stories. Practice more storytelling, because stories elicit emotions and they create that emotional connection that drives active support. And that's what we all want to grow our business, right? We want better business results. We want a bigger bonus. We want to be able to help the community more. We want to be able to employ and empower more people. So start by breaking down silos.
Breaking down silos. I love that. It's probably one of the biggest downfalls that companies continue to struggle with, and in a lot where everybody's in their own little world doing their own thing. So we want to be breaking down silos across the company, but certainly within the context of marketing and internal comms, as we've been discussing. And storytelling, of course, is a great way to execute on communication activities that support employee engagement. And another great nugget there. Arlene, thank you so very much for an awesome conversation. You have such a multifaceted background in communications and marketing, and you are also a host of your own podcast. So I'd love to ask, how can we, the internal marketing tribe listening, how can we support you?
Kerry-Ann, first of all, thanks for this amazing conversation. For any of our listeners out there, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Arlene Amitirigala. You can find me at my website, trulyarlene.com, where I have blog posts, and you can listen to my podcast. It's called the Change Diaries Podcast. It's on Spotify and it's on Apple. And I talk about change because I'm someone who has experienced, well, all of us have experienced a lot of change, but Canada is the 7th country I've lived in. I'm originally from Jamaica, and I talk about change, how to better embrace change, spark change, or be the change we want to see. So give it a listen if you will.
That's wonderful. Yes, folks, we're going to definitely tune in. And of course, Arlene, I'm going to drop all of the links you would have shared in the show notes, link to your LinkedIn profile, your website, and the links to the podcast directories where the Change Diaries podcast is listed so that folks can easily find all of that and tune in. And yes, follow Arlene for sure. And that's it for today's episode. I hope that you've gotten some valuable takeaways from today's discussion. And if you found it valuable, then please, I invite you as always to share it with someone who you believe will find it valuable as well. If you're not already subscribed to the Internal Marketing Podcast, please join the family. The podcast is available on your favorite podcasting app. Thank you again for listening. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.